you know, there's always going to be people when you make something that's somewhat controversial that are just flat out not going to like what you're doing.
Right.
And we didn't make the movie for them. You know?
Do you think she has any just kind of inherent weaknesses or...
I mean, I don't really believe in weaknesses in people.
Okay.
That's the crux of my problem. Luke would never say that. I'm sorry. Well, in this version, see, I'm talking about the George Lucas Star Wars. This is the next generation of Star Wars. So I almost had to think of Luke as another character. Maybe he's Jake Skywalker. He's not my Luke Skywalker.
Even back in 2012, Disney's acquisition of Lucasfilm was met with cautious excitement. Fans hoped the franchise would be reinvigorated, even expanded, under Disney's vast resources. But what followed with the sequel trilogy was an absolute betrayal. What Disney delivered was a disjointed mess that prioritized corporate box-checking and ideological posturing over cohesive storytelling. The sequels were calculated, hollow, and agenda-driven. Disney's sole focus was modernizing Star Wars to fit current cultural narratives. Key characters were sidelined, legacy heroes were diminished, and plot lines contradicted or outright ignored each other. The heart of Star Wars, heroism, sacrifice, and redemption, was replaced with a jumbled mix of fan service and shallow attempts to subvert expectations. And it's probably even worse than you remember.
I don't buy the Mary Sue thing anyway. I find the term sexist in itself.
Okay.
Disney slapped the Star Wars logo on a new box, and everyone lost their minds. And I mean, let's be fair, at first glance, it looked promising. Abrams was at the helm. His track record with Star Trek never gave me any hope, but at least he knew how to juggle nostalgia and new ideas. Then you had Rey, Finn, and Poe, fresh faces who were supposed to carry the torch. It had the right ingredients. The opening sequence was a rare moment, probably the best moment in the entire trilogy. Kylo Ren stepping out of that shuttle with his distorted voice and cross-guard lightsaber. It had the gritty vibe of an actual war, something Star Wars often dances around but rarely delivers. Finn's breakdown after witnessing the massacre was a fascinating angle, a stormtrooper with a conscience, and then Rey, scrappy, resourceful, surviving on scraps in a derelict starship graveyard. It felt like we might get a deeper exploration of moral conflict and personal resilience. But then the deja vu hit. Jakku was just Tatooine. Starkiller Base was the Death Star on steroids. Rey's rise was Luke's origin story with the cheat codes enabled. Even the droids had the same energy. BB-8 was basically R2 with extra pep. Now, I get it. Nostalgia sells. But the problem is, when you're spending $200 million to relaunch one of the most iconic franchises in history, safe doesn't cut it. Safe is boring. And make no mistake, this wasn't just a tip of the hat to the past. It was Disney playing it so cautious, they tripped over their own feet. Here's the thing about the original trilogy. It ended on a hopeful note. The Empire was defeated, Luke redeemed his father, and the galaxy had a shot at peace. But no, Disney couldn't let that stand. Han's back to being a smuggler like nothing happened. Leia's reduced to a general in a resistance that shouldn't even exist because, the rebellion already won. And Luke, the guy who faced down Darth Vader and the Emperor, just gives up and bails. That's the best they could come up with. Also, they could clear the stage for their new characters, and the cherry on top were the mystery boxes. Abrams loves those. Who are Rey's parents? Who is Snoke? Why did Luke go into exile? These questions were dangled in front of us like bait, and we fell for it. The problem is there was no plan. None. As later revealed, the sequels were made up on the fly, with Rian Johnson swooping in to blow everything up in The Last Jedi. But even here, in The Force Awakens, the cracks were showing. Rey was ridiculously overpowered. She masters the Force in about 5 minutes, beats Kylo Ren in her first duel, and flies the Millennium Falcon like a pro. Luke had to spend 2 movies training with Yoda before he could even hold his own. The term Mary Sue gets thrown around a lot. But in Rey's case, it's hard to argue otherwise. What's fascinating is how the Hollywood machine, particularly the media class, worked overtime to defend this movie. Look up old reviews, they're glowing. Critics hailed it as a masterpiece, a return to form. But fans were more divided. Yeah, the normies loved it. Nostalgia is powerful, but hardcore Star Wars fans were already sensing trouble. They saw the recycled plot lines, the character inconsistencies, and the blatant disregard for what came before. And the people who questioned the movie got labeled toxic, sexist, racist, the same old playbook the cultural progressives always use to shut down debate. Oh, you didn't like Rey? Must be because she's a woman. You thought Finn was underdeveloped? Clearly, you hate diversity. The same fans who loved Leia, Lando, and Mace Windu long before Disney got their hands on this franchise. But the narrative was set. If you didn't bow down to Disney's vision, you were the problem. And yet, for all its faults, The Force Awakens wasn't a total disaster. Finn and Poe's bromance had more spark than most of the actual romances in the saga. Kylo Ren, as much as he was a moody edgelord, at least had layers. Adam Driver brought a vulnerability to the character that made him compelling, even if his motivations were a mess. There were moments where you could see the potential for something great, but potential without payoff is meaningless, and the seeds of disaster were already planted. This set the tone for a trilogy that prioritized corporate interests over storytelling. You can practically see the boardroom meetings in every decision. Familiar settings? Check. Iconic ships? Check. Merchandise-friendly droids? Double check.
I did pose this provocative idea, who is Luke Skywalker, that would be something that was said by one of our characters.
Why was who is Luke Skywalker such a fascinating question?
The Last Jedi lit a match, poured gasoline all over the legacy of the original trilogy, and walked away whistling like nothing happened. If you're wondering how we went from The Force Awakens playing it painfully safe to this, a movie that seemed designed to alienate half the audience, we'll probably never know. I've talked a lot about Luke Skywalker, the man, the myth, the hero who risked everything because he believed Darth fucking Vader could be redeemed. 30 years later, we find a sad, broken hermit who drinks space milk straight from the source and thinks about murdering his teenage nephew in his sleep. Seriously? That's what we waited 3 decades for? They took everything fans admired about Luke, his hope, his resilience, his unwavering faith in others, and trashed it in a flashback that couldn't have lasted more than 20 seconds. The villains were as worse as the heroes. Snoke, who died as he lived, completely unexplained. This guy was supposed to be the big bad, the puppet master pulling Kylo Ren's strings, the new Emperor Palpatine, but Rian Johnson decided to slice him in half halfway through the movie like he was some random henchman in a Bond flick. Was it shocking? Yes. Was it good storytelling? Absolutely not. It was tearing the spine out of the trilogy's overarching plot and expecting the audience to cheer. Who was Snoke? Where did he come from? Why was he so powerful?
My disappointment in your performance cannot be overstated.
Oh, but it gets better. The infamous Holdo maneuver. You know, the scene where Vice Admiral Purplehair decides to ram her ship into a First Order fleet at lightspeed. Stunning visuals, I'll give it that, but let's think this through. If you can turn a ship into a hyperspace missile, why hasn't anyone done it before? Why did the rebellion spend decades fighting the Empire with starfighters and capital ships when they could have just kamikazed a few old cruisers?
Fire on that cruiser!
Even the Force got ruined. It used to be this mystical energy field with limits. Now, Luke can project a holographic version of himself across the galaxy without breaking a sweat, well, except for the part where it literally kills him. Where did this ability come from? Did Yoda or Obi-Wan just forget to mention it? And if this is something Jedi can do, why didn't they use it in, I don't know, every major battle in Star Wars history? But let's not stop there. How about Canto Bight?
It's a terrible place filled with the worst people in the galaxy.
That little detour to a casino planet where we get a lecture on war profiteering and animal cruelty, because that's what I go to Star Wars for. Thinly veiled social commentary from people who probably have Che Guevara t-shirts in their closet. The whole sequence was basically a PSA made by people who couldn't decide whether they hated capitalism or loved selling toys more. It killed the movie's pacing, contributed nothing to the main plot, and ended with one of the most saccharine, eye-roll inducing moments in the franchise, Rose Tico's speech.
I saved you. That's how we're gonna win. Not fighting what we hate. Saving what we love.
And don't think I forgot about Rey. In The Force Awakens, her parentage was set up like this huge mystery. Who were her parents? Were they Jedi? Were they connected to the Skywalkers? Nope. Turns out she's a nobody, just some random kid from nowhere.
Do you want to know the truth about your parents?
They were nobody.
They were filthy junk traders who sold you off for drinking money. The dead in a pauper's grave in the Jakku Desert. You have no place in this story. You come from nothing. You're nothing.
The cherry on top has to be the way Johnson treats the legacy of The Force Awakens. The Last Jedi was just Johnson reading Abrams' script, laughing at it, and deciding to toss every setup in the trash. Luke's lightsaber was a symbol of hope and history, and it was thrown over a cliff for a cheap laugh. And Rey's journey was reduced to platitudes about how anyone can be special if they just believe hard enough.
How Rey beat Kylo Ren.
Why is that so hard for people to get? Like, she's super strong and he's like so weak.
He kicked his ass. That's how Rey beat Kylo.
Disney's Star Wars sequel trilogy was a cultural fiasco, and The Rise of Skywalker was its bloated, stumbling finale. And it was the predictable result of putting ideological crusaders and corporate bean counters in charge of a franchise that deserved much better. You could see the cracks forming years before. When The Last Jedi came out in December 2017, Rian Johnson made it clear he wasn't interested in honoring the saga's legacy. But he handed us a movie that was basically a 2-hour Tumblr post, and Disney knew they had a problem on their hands. Enter Abrams, the man who launched this trilogy with The Force Awakens. Abrams was supposed to bring it all together in 2019 with The Rise of Skywalker, but what we got was an incoherent disaster that might as well have been written by Reddit bots. Palpatine was a spit in the face of everything the original trilogy stood for. If you've been a fan for more than 5 minutes, you know that Anakin Skywalker's sacrifice in Return of the Jedi was the moment. He defeats the Emperor, redeems himself, and fulfills the prophecy of bringing balance to the Force. But apparently in the Disney era, no one's really dead unless they're a fan favorite like Han Solo, Luke Skywalker, or maybe Admiral Akbar. But Palpatine, sure. Let's resurrect him with zero buildup because reasons.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
The opening crawl literally reads, "The dead speak." That's it. That's the explanation. But this wasn't storytelling. It was an obvious panic. Palpatine's return wasn't teased in The Force Awakens. It wasn't hinted at in The Last Jedi. It was dropped on us like a bad fan theory that somehow made it into the script.
The dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural.
Here's the thing about The Rise of Skywalker. It moves so fast you don't even have time to realize how much it sucks while you're watching it. Abrams threw everything at the wall to see what would stick, and most of it didn't. The pacing was so rushed it felt like the movie was afraid you'd walk out if it slowed down for a second. New characters like Zori Bliss and Janna were introduced only to be forgotten within minutes. Established characters were given the shaft. Rose Tico, who Disney had bizarrely doubled down on in The Last Jedi, despite overwhelming fan disinterest, was suddenly relegated to background duty because online backlash made her character radioactive. Even Finn, who had one of the most promising starts in The Force Awakens, was reduced to yelling "Rey" over and over again while being shoved into pointless side plots. He was supposed to be a Force-sensitive stormtrooper turned rebel with a compelling redemption arc. Poe, the cocky ace pilot, who could have been a modern Han Solo, was also wasted. And then there's Rey, the Disney trilogy's chosen one. And apparently she's still getting her own movie to do what Luke was supposed to do. In The Force Awakens, she was intriguing, mysterious, capable, and mildly likable. Mildly. But the longer the trilogy dragged on, the more apparent it became that Disney had no clue what to do with her. The big twist in The Rise of Skywalker was she's Palpatine's granddaughter. We forgot The Last Jedi's attempt to make her a nobody, which actually worked on some level. But no, now it's all about bloodlines again. But not just any bloodlines, evil ones. Apparently your family tree is everything unless you choose to cosplay as a Skywalker at the end. It really was less of a meaningful arc and more like Disney trying to hedge its bets after alienating fans with The Last Jedi. The Force has probably suffered the most at the hands of Disney because this movie didn't just misunderstand it, it practically mocked it. Force healing turned into something else. Let's just have Rey resurrect Kylo Ren at one point, because why should death matter in Star Wars anymore? Then there's the Force dyad, an entirely new concept invented on the spot to justify why Rey and Kylo are so connected. No build-up, no explanation, just here it is. Deal with it. By the way, the dyad apparently means they can teleport objects to each other now. Who knew? The final battle made a lot of sense, because it was the logical conclusion that could only work in this trilogy. But let's set aside the fact that a fleet of Death Star-equipped Star Destroyers materialized out of nowhere. Forget that the logistics of secretly building thousands of warships on Exegol are beyond absurd. What really killed me was how the Resistance just shows up with their own fleet because Lando called for help. Apparently, thousands of ships can mobilize overnight if Billy D. Williams asks nicely. If you can suspend disbelief enough to buy that, I've got a bridge to sell you. But here's where the gloves really come off. It wasn't just bad storytelling that ruined the Rise of Skywalker. It was the entire culture surrounding Disney's Star Wars. These movies weren't made for fans. They were made to appease Hollywood's self-righteous mob. Representation and diversity aren't bad things, but Disney approached it with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Every decision was designed to win online points. Look at Rey's instant mastery of the Force. Critics who dared question it were met with accusations of sexism. It couldn't possibly be bad writing, right? Then there's Finn. He was marketed as a revolutionary character, a black stormtrooper turned hero. And what did Disney do? They shoved him to the sidelines after The Force Awakens. Disney's obsession with optics over quality created a trilogy that was neither progressive nor well-made. Fans who criticized the films for legitimate reasons, plot holes, lazy writing, disrespect for legacy characters, were not racists or misogynists. Disney cranked out Star Wars movies like they were printing money. Between spin-offs, TV series, and endless merchandise, the franchise went from something special to something disposable. It was a symbol of everything wrong with the modern entertainment industry.